Professor shared the dumbest student they ever had to teach in school. Story 1. May or may not be dumb, but my friend and I went to her uncle's house, which had this piece of paper framed and put on the wall. It was a 0 out of 20 on a true or false quiz. Her uncle was a professor and was just too impressed by such an achievement that he had to put it in his home. Story 2. Happened in the first week of a college anthropology course. Professor: let's list a few basic differences between modern humans and animals. Student: we have a heartbeat. Story 3. A student in my economics class started his final essay with this: we are all familiar with the country Africa, yet at the same time we know little about them. All we know is that it is hot there. African Americans live there and they are really poor. This begs the question, why is Africa that poor? It was just so jam-packed with stupid I had to stop grading for 24 hours. Edit: for the record, this was indeed a college student. Story 4. This happened in high school, senior year. Our teacher was talking about the phases of the moon, and this girl raised her hand and asked if other countries have moons too. She thought the moon was only for the U.S. Story 5. I saw some amazingly bad attempts at plagiarism in my day. These included plagiarizing from an article in a journal the professor edited. This was a grad student. Plagiarizing from the same source as another student in the same class. First hit on Google is not your friend. Turning in a sophomore-led survey paper referring to a poet's use of hendecasyllabics. I have a doctoral degree and I had to look that one up. Googled author's name and hendecasyllabics, and there was the paper. Only thing the student contributed was her name. When caught red-handed, insisted tearfully that she didn't plagiarize. Her roommate wrote the paper for her, and her roommate was the dirty plagiarist. I was literally speechless for a moment while I grappled with this line of reasoning. Bonus points, that was Miss hendecasyllabics. Story 6. I don't know if this qualifies as dumb or is closer to stupid, but I had a student who didn't show up for class regularly, and her grade was going to be a C, maybe a D depending on her final exam. What made her dumb, however, was how she tried to cheat on the final exam. She reached down into her bag and took out her phone, put it on the desk, typed something into it, looked at the test, looked at her phone, looked back at her desk, rechecked her phone, then answered whatever question she was looking up. Just to make sure, I let her do it one more time. I was watching her the whole time, and she was completely oblivious to it. She got an F. Story 7. I had a student who wrote an art history paper about Leonard da Vinci. Didn't even run that sucker through the spell check or anything. Referred to him as that throughout the entire paper. Story 8. One of my students told me that he was going to be 21 when he graduated high school. I asked him why. He explained that he ages 2 years every year. He is 15 turning 16, so that's 2 years. He is probably right that he will not graduate high school till age 21, but not for the reasons he mentioned, lol. Story 9. The one who would regularly hand in essays which were obviously copy-pasted. They didn't bother to change the font or color of the paragraphs that were lifted from other websites. They never argued or shared their opinion, but would ask vague questions such as, but what is the United States? At the end of a lecture or a tutorial that was about a legal decision. Story 10. As a GA teaching freshman English, I had a couple instances of cheating that left me speechless. First, my university uses an online plagiarism checker, and the students know this. With one student, over half of his essays was copied from a website. He looked genuinely shocked when I called him out on it, and then told me that his mother wrote the paper for him. I explained that his mother writing his paper was also cheating. Then he asked if he could get credit for the half that wasn't from a website. Another time, the students had to analyze a movie showing how it used the hero's journey as plot structure. This was an easy assignment, seeing as how nearly every modern movie uses the structure. The student copied the Wikipedia summary of Aladdin word for word, and he denied doing it. He argued it was a coincidence that his entire essay was the exact same as Wikipedia's. Story 11. Not a professor, but back when I was in high school, I was a library aide, and I was walking into classrooms distributing some books, and I walked into a class with the professor in the middle of an angry lecture on plagiarism because one of the students turned in an essay that started with, "In my 25 plus years of experience in this field." Story 12. In high school British Lit class, we had to do a paper on a British author. One of my classmates wanted to do a paper on an African-American British author and frustratedly exclaimed to the entire library that she couldn't find any. I'm not sure how she ever figured it out. Bonus, this was a senior honors English class. Story 13. We were discussing the 3 most common phases of matter, solids, liquids, and gases. Using water as the example, I asked the student to tell me what we call the solid phase of water. He replied, "Oil." I was dumbstruck, but mine was only temporary. Story 14. A student once threatened to sue me over the definition of the terms necessary and sufficient that he had mixed up in an exam. No biggie to mix them up, actually, for a math major it might be. But loudly threatening to sue me over an age-old textbook definition in an exam review session was kind of stupid. It did entertain all the other students who were present. Another student once requested letters of recommendation for 5 of the top 10 master's programs in Europe while being the second worst in his class of several hundred graduates. Story 15. I didn't have any particularly dumb students. Also not a professor, but a graduate teaching assistant. But I did mark one essay that began so eloquently with, "Do we born with intelligent?" Edit, as an addendum, because I find this story hilarious, the second sentence was, "How our cognitive is developed." One of my fellow PhD students marked an essay once which came in at 2 pages. It was a 6-page limit, and half of the essay, so 1 page, discussed Mowgli from Disney animated version of the Jungle Book. The topic was developmental psychology. Story 16. One of my husband's colleagues said a kid came up to him after an exam and said, "I didn't know the answers to the questions you asked on the test, so I made up my own questions and answered them." The professor said, "That's the stupidest thing I have ever heard, and when I go to lunch, I'm going to tell all of my friends." Story 17. This happened in high school, senior year. Our teacher was talking about the phases of the moon, and this girl raised her hand and asked if other countries have moons too. She thought the moon was only for the US. Story 18. Not a professor, but in my statistics class, a girl asked if changing the minus to a plus would change the answer. Not a negative to a positive, like she wasn't questioning how negatives work, she sincerely wanted to know if changing from subtraction to addition would change the answer. To the professor's credit, she answered with a kind yes and only a slight pause. Story 19. Had lots of students from Saudi Arabia. They typically push boundaries, so I learned quickly to set boundaries and be firm and fair with everyone in the class. One guy didn't see the need to come to class much or do homework, and his grades suffered greatly. He came in one day and said, "I want a better grade. My family is the XXXXXs." I don't remember the name. But apparently they were wealthy and well respected. I didn't care, and I reminded him of his lack of effort. He was pissed and he made some generic threats, but nothing specific I could call anyone about. I found out from the other Saudi students, most of which hated the guy, that he said fuck it during the last week and went home without taking any finals. Maybe he was more arrogant, but I'd say he was also a dumbass. Story 20. Actually one of the smarter kids in my class. Ethics, awareness of social norms, not so much. He sent me an email after the semester ended, asking if I'd mind telling my next semester class that his digital textbook was available for sale. Oh, and that it's a PDF, so if multiple people want it, he can sell them all copies. I responded that I admire his entrepreneurial spirit, but it probably wasn't a good idea to solicit his professor's help in starting a piracy-based book-selling business.